Massachusetts Historical Society is home to a bottle with original tea from the historic protest, and it's now sharing its exhibition in honor of the anniversary.
This didn't start with a discovery. It started with a whisper. One photo buried deep in a forgotten archive, tucked between pages no one had touched in decades.
Come to see our exhibition, you're going to see a series of connected rooms.
5 sisters, all standing still, all staring forward. The year was 1836, but something felt off. The image didn't match the time. The dresses weren't quite right. The eyes are too focused. And behind them, a shape, just barely visible in the shadow of a window.
As never before, the breadth and the value, the extreme value of the collections and of the people who work there.
Historians thought it was a trick of the light, until someone zoomed in. What they saw turned this photo into a mystery no one could explain. A picture with no name. It was a routine scan. A volunteer archivist is working through a box of unlabeled photographs in a small Massachusetts Historical Society. Most of the images were mundane, grainy portraits, faded town parades, and sepia-toned schoolhouses. But at the bottom of the box, wrapped in delicate parchment, was something older. A daguerreotype. The kind made with silver and mercury, popular before photography had even become a profession. 5 girls, teenagers maybe, standing side by side in matching dresses, holding hands. No names, no markings, just the handwritten year, 1836. The frame was heavy and the glass was scratched with age, but their faces were hauntingly clear, not stiff or blurred like most portraits from the time. Their expressions were solemn, almost defiant, and the composition was strangely modern, perfectly symmetrical, with every detail in balance. It didn't make sense. The photo was sent to a regional university for further analysis. Experts expected to date it, catalog it, and move on. But something about the photo refused to let them go. When they enhanced it digitally, they found what the naked eye had missed. And the question arose, why did this one photo survive so long, so untouched, and with no record of who these sisters were? There were no markings on the frame, no paper trail, just the stillness of 5 unknown girls framed in silver, silent, unblinking, and somehow deliberately waiting. It felt less like a keepsake and more like a clue that was never meant to be seen. Unearthed in a library basement. The university's archive team had seen thousands of early American photographs, but this one was different. It didn't just show history, it unsettled it. The image was physically mailed to them, along with a short note from the volunteer, found in a mislabeled genealogy box, believed to be from Berkshire County. Curious, the team began tracing its provenance. They searched census records, land deeds, and even old diaries from the 1830s. Nothing. It was as if the girls had never existed. But while digging through microfilm records in the university's old library basement, a grad student made a strange discovery. A weathered inventory log from 1912 listed the same photograph, described in detail, marked as lost, presumed destroyed in basement flooding, 1914. That flood had damaged hundreds of archives, and many were thought to be gone forever. Yet here the photo was, intact and unspoiled. Why wasn't it listed in any recovery reports? How had it ended up 50 miles away in a town historical society with no connection to the original collection? The box it was found in had no return name, no institutional tags, just a plain wrapping, sealed with aged wax. The wax bore a faint imprint, 3 triangles inside a circle, unfamiliar to anyone on staff. Someone had gone through deliberate effort not to preserve the photo, but to remove it from memory. And whoever that person was, they succeeded until now. Because once the photo surfaced, things that were long buried began surfacing with it. The 5 faces. They weren't identical, but they had something shared in their features, a sharpness around the jaw, eyes that seemed too aware for the time. Experts enlarged each face, analyzing texture, expression, and position. The girls stood in a row, oldest at the center, hands lightly interlocked. All wore dark, modest dresses with high collars. But their eyes, that's where things started to slip. One historian described it as a stare that doesn't belong in 1836. Not scared, not frozen, just steady, as if they were looking at the person behind the camera, not with curiosity, but recognition, like they expected it. What disturbed researchers most wasn't the expressions themselves, but how consistent they were. In early daguerreotypes, even slight movement blurred a face. But these 5 were crystal clear, perfect posture, no tremble, no shadow of hesitation, as if they'd trained for it. A facial recognition scan, run more for curiosity than serious intent, triggered another anomaly. There were partial matches, not from the 1800s, but from photos in the 1920s and 40s. Women who looked eerily similar, decades apart. Different names, different places, same bone structure, same eyes. The image began to feel less like a portrait and more like a message meant for someone in particular. Clues in the background. The sisters stood in front of a plain wall. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable, just a narrow room with faded paneling. But as digital restoration brought more clarity, patterns began to emerge. Behind the girl on the far right, a sliver of window peeked into the frame. And outside that window, something unsettling came into view. Not a tree, not a street. A mirror? No, too dim. It looked like a reflection, but one that didn't match the room. There was movement, blurred, as if someone or something had been standing just out of sight during the exposure. The motion shouldn't have registered. Daguerreotypes were sensitive, but slow. Yet there it was, a ripple in time. One analyst noticed the wallpaper trim near the ceiling had a pattern inconsistent with 1830s design, a type of pressed tin motif, more common in the 1870s. Another spotted a faint shadow on the floor, a curve too perfect, too manufactured, possibly a wheel. But wheels weren't in parlors. There was more. A faint marking was etched into the lower right wall paneling, almost invisible without enhancement. 3 symbols aligned in a triangle. Unknown origin. The background was no longer just scenery. It was a puzzle, waiting to be solved. The 1836 discrepancy. The date, 1836, was handwritten in graphite along the edge of the backing plate. At first, no one questioned it. The script matched period style and the aging of the ink was consistent. But one researcher, skeptical by nature, decided to dig deeper. He compared the handwriting with letters from that decade. The curves of the numbers, the tilt of the letters. Something didn't sit right. It was too clean, too modern. And the graphite? Testing revealed it was a blend not commercially available until the 1870s. That alone should have resolved it. Someone had simply mislabeled an old photo. But further investigation complicated things. The camera used to make the daguerreotype was a French model, extremely rare in the US during the 1830s. Yet this specific make had only reached the East Coast in limited quantities around 1839. So what did that mean? Either the photo was older than it looked, or newer than it claimed. But if it was newer, why pretend otherwise? Why write 1836? Why frame it in a style that was obsolete by 1850? It wasn't just a misdated photo anymore. It was a deliberate fabrication, or a record of something that shouldn't have been possible. Now first, like always, be sure to hit the like button down below. It helps us out tremendously with the reach of this video. Thank you. The eyes that follow. The more the team studied the sisters' faces, the more disturbing it became. They had reviewed countless daguerreotypes, but none of them behaved like this one. Under high-resolution scans, the eyes of the second sister from the left revealed something subtle, an asymmetry not present in the others. Her left eye was ever so slightly misaligned, angled just off-center. At first, it was dismissed as a minor deformity, but when researchers rotated and enhanced the image, they noticed something chilling. Her gaze shifted. It didn't move, of course. It was still a photograph. But the angle created a parallax effect so precise, it felt intentional. Wherever you stood in the room, that girl was looking at you. Unlike the Mona Lisa's painted illusion, this was mechanical, engineered. A technician placed the image behind UV glass to reduce light exposure. As they lowered the cover, she felt a drop in temperature, not imagined, measurable. The room had cooled by 2 degrees. One professor began refusing to work in the lab after dark. It wasn't that the photo was haunted. There were no stories of ghosts, no tragic deaths. It was worse. This photo was behaving like it remembered something or someone, the fabric that shouldn't exist. At some point, curiosity shifted into obsession. A textile historian was brought in to examine the sisters' dresses, hoping to date them more accurately. At first, everything aligned with 1830s rural fashion: dark cotton, long sleeves, and high collars. But one detail wouldn't let go. The third sister wore a sash, pale gray, with a texture too fine for the time. The weave was inconsistent with known American or European looms of the 19th century. Under magnification, the threads resembled modern synthetic blends. Not exact, but close. Too close. The historian ran an infrared analysis. The sash reflected differently, more like rayon or nylon, both materials that wouldn't exist for another 100 years. Contamination was ruled out. The photo had never been tampered with. It was authentic and impossible. The print was scanned again using hyperspectral imaging. In the ultraviolet range, the fabric emitted a faint glow, not chemical, not metallic, more like a faint residue, as if it had been exposed to something no one could identify. No other part of the photo reacted this way, just the sash, just that sister. She stood with a faint smile, almost smug, as if she knew what the others didn't, or maybe what the others couldn't remember. A name reappears. For weeks, the investigation led nowhere. The sisters remained nameless, frozen in silver. But then a breakthrough came, not from a lab, but from an old newspaper archive digitized only recently. A small notice in an 1891 edition of the Berkshire County Courier caught someone's eye. It was a short column titled, "The Five from Hollow Creek." The article told of 5 sisters who lived in seclusion near the edge of Hollow Creek, a hamlet that no longer appeared on modern maps. Locals claimed they never aged, that they wore the same dresses year after year, that they didn't speak much except in whispers to one another. The sisters were said to have vanished after a thunderstorm split an old oak on their property. No bodies were found, just footprints leading into the woods and never returning. The article mentioned a name: Magdalene Rook, eldest of the Hollow Creek Five. That name had never surfaced in any census. No graves, no birth records, no marriage licenses. But when the image was run through genealogical software, Magdalene Rook matched with a woman buried in 1954. She had no listed siblings. Her photo? Nearly identical to the girl standing second from the right. The vanishing town. Hollow Creek wasn't supposed to exist, not anymore. Old maps listed it as a settlement between 2 ridges in Berkshire County, but by the early 1900s, it had disappeared entirely. No modern records, no coordinates, just fading mentions in local folklore and the occasional reference in forgotten land deeds. The team tracked one such deed to a property once owned by the Rook family. The land was now forest, dense, uneven, and eerily quiet. A drone survey revealed faint rectangular shapes beneath the tree canopy. Stone outlines, foundations maybe, but there were no visible roads, no mail routes, no signs of excavation. It was as if the town had simply folded in on itself. A historian made a field visit equipped with LiDAR and a metal detector. He returned with a single object, a small brooch, tarnished but intact. Its shape matched the clasp on the youngest sister's dress in the photo. That piece hadn't been visible before. But when they zoomed in again, it was there, just barely catching the light. It was as if the photo was revealing itself slowly, like it needed them to see it piece by piece. But the real shock hadn't come yet. That came when they zoomed in, again, zoomed and pale. It was late. Most of the team had left for the night. Only one researcher remained, curious, restless, unwilling to let go. She pulled up the image one last time, this time focusing on the window. The shadowy blur that had always felt out of place. With enhanced contrast and careful pixel isolation, the shape began to sharpen. And what emerged wasn't a person. It wasn't an object either. It was a face, distorted, as if viewed through water, eyes too wide, mouth parted as if caught mid-sentence. But it didn't resemble any of the sisters or anyone human. Its outline is curved, angular, and unnatural. almost insect-like. And worst of all, it was staring directly at the camera. When she zoomed in further, the screen flickered. Just once. A harmless glitch, maybe. But then something else happened. The reflection in the window had depth. Shadows fell in directions that didn't match the rest of the room. The laws of light didn't apply. It wasn't a reflection. It was another space, layered just behind theirs. She stepped back. In that moment, she understood why the photo had no record, no owner, no explanation. It wasn't taken in 1836. It was left behind. The photo now sits in a locked archival drawer, far from public view. Not because it's dangerous, but because no one can explain it. 5 sisters, no history, no lineage. A town erased. A window to somewhere else. Experts came up with theories. They left in silence. And that face, just behind the glass, remains frozen in every scan. Unblinking. Patient. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's a trick of time and chemistry. But every so often, a new researcher stumbles across the file. They always zoom in. They always go pale. And then they always ask the same question. Who or what took the photo?